The late afternoon sun, the colour of pale honey, filtered through the immense arched windows of the Oakwood estate, casting long, dancing shadows across the polished marble floor. It was the kind of light that made everything look expensive, a soft focus glow that romanticized the exorbitant price tag of the day. And I should know, I had paid for every last gilded detail, from the cascading garlands of white roses and peonies that smelled of sweet, cloying success, to the string quartet playing a tasteful Vivaldi in the corner. This wedding was a monument to my generosity. My grandson, Michael, was getting married, and like every other significant event in my family's life for the past 2 decades, I had been the silent, ever-reliable benefactor. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for a long time I believed that was my role, the matriarch, the provider, the bedrock upon which my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Tom, had built their comfortable, upper-middle-class life. I saw my financial support not as a transaction, but as an extension of my love, a tangible way to show I cared, to ensure they never faced the hardships my late husband Robert and I had endured in our early years. Robert had been a shrewd businessman, building a small manufacturing company into a regional powerhouse. When he passed 10 years ago, he left me more than comfortable. He left me with a legacy I intended to share. As I stood near the entrance of the grand ballroom, a glass of champagne, the really good kind, the one Tom had specifically requested, in my hand, I watched my family mingle. Sarah, my only child, looked radiant in a sapphire blue dress that probably cost more than my first car. She was laughing, a tinkling sound that never quite reached her eyes, as she chatted with the bride's parents. Tom, her husband, was holding court by the raw bar, gesturing expansively with a half-eaten oyster in his hand. He had a way of commanding a room, of acting as though he was the one hosting the party, not the one whose mother-in-law had quietly settled the 5-figure deposit. My grandchildren, apart from Michael, were scattered about. Jessica, 22, was glued to her phone, no doubt posting filtered photos of the event with a hashtag that suggested a life of effortless glamour. Young Daniel, 16, was awkwardly trying to talk to one of the bridesmaids, his suit, which I'd paid for last week, already looking rumpled. My heart swelled with a familiar, complicated pride. This was my family, loud, a little self-absorbed, perhaps, but mine. Michael, the groom, finally broke away from a receiving line of distant relatives and rushed over to me. "Grandma Ellie, you made it." He enveloped me in a hug, his face beaming with the pure, unadulterated joy that only a man on his wedding day can possess. He smelled faintly of cologne and nervous sweat. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart," I said, smoothing the lapel of his tuxedo. He was a good boy, always had been, quieter than the rest of his family, with a sensitive soul that sometimes seemed out of place amidst their boisterous ambition. "You look so handsome. Your grandfather would have been so proud." "Thanks, Grandma. It's a lot, isn't it?" he said, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room. "Mum and Dad really went all out." I offered a gentle smile, the words catching in my throat. "They didn't go all out, Michael. I did, but I couldn't say that. It would have been crass. It would have spoiled his perfect day. It's what you deserve," I said instead. He gave me one last squeeze before his new bride, a lovely girl named Chloe, beckoned him back to her side. I watched him go, the smile still fixed on my face. It was then that I first heard it. A whisper, carried on a gust of laughter from a nearby table where a few of Tom's cousins were sitting. "And there she is, the bank, making sure her investment is paying off," one of them said, tilting his head in my direction. My smile faltered. My hand tightened on my champagne flute. It was a crude joke, nothing more. The kind of thing men like Tom's cousins, men who valued everything by its dollar amount, would say. I tried to dismiss it, to let it slide off me like water off a duck's back. I was Eleanor Vance. I had thicker skin than that. I took a sip of my champagne, the bubbles fizzing sharply on my tongue, and turned my attention to the magnificent ice sculpture of 2 swans, their necks entwined. Another line item on an invoice I had paid without blinking. But then, a few minutes later, I walked past a different group, this one composed of some of Sarah's friends, women I'd known for years. They were admiring Jessica's dress. "Sarah is so lucky," one of them sighed, her voice dripping with envy. "Her mother just bankrolls everything. I have to beg my husband for a new handbag. Tell me about it," another chimed in. "They call her the Bank of Ellie," Jessica told me. "Apparently, it's the family nickname." The words hit me with a physical force, a punch to the gut that left me breathless. The Bank of Ellie. It wasn't just a crude joke from a distant cousin, it was a nickname, the family nickname. A wave of nausea washed over me. The champagne suddenly tasted sour, metallic. I looked around the room, but now I saw it through a different lens. The smiles seemed predatory. The laughter sounded like mockery. Every glance in my direction felt like an appraisal. They weren't looking at Eleanor Vance, loving mother and grandmother. They were looking at a walking, talking ATM. I felt a sudden, desperate need for air. I made my way through the throng of guests, my movements stiff, my face a carefully constructed mask of pleasant neutrality. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out onto the stone terrace. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and damp earth from the sprawling estate gardens. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. I stood there for a long time, my back to the celebration, my knuckles white as I gripped the cold stone balustrade. The Vivaldi from the ballroom was a faint, mocking melody in the distance. How long had they been calling me that? How long had my daughter, my own flesh and blood, stood by and let them? A lifetime of memories began to unspool in my mind, but they were now reframed, tainted by this new, ugly truth. Every check I'd written, every tuition fee I'd paid, every lavish vacation I'd funded, was it all just a transaction to them? Was love ever part of the equation? I thought of Sarah's call a few months ago. "Mum, we found the most perfect venue for Michael and Chloe's wedding. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's his big day, you know. It's what he deserves." I had heard the unasked question in her voice, and as always I had filled the silence with a solution that involved my checkbook. I had been so happy to do it, picturing the joy on Michael's face. Now the memory felt sordid, like I'd been a willing participant in my own deception. A cold certainty began to settle in my bones, as heavy and unyielding as the stone beneath my hands. For years I had been living in a gilded cage of my own making, furnishing it with my wealth, and mistaking the bars for pillars of family love. Tonight, they hadn't just given me a nickname, they had given me a key. The key wasn't to the cage, but to a vault of clarity I hadn't realized was sealed shut. The party inside was in full swing, a celebration of a union I had paid for. But the only union that mattered to me now was the one between my past and my present, the ugly, undeniable truth connecting 2 decades of generosity to a single, devastating nickname. Something inside me, something that had been dormant for a very long time, began to wake up, and it was angry. Leaning against the balustrade, I watched as the sky bled from bruised purple into an inky, star-pricked black. The chill on the terrace was a welcome shock to my system, a physical manifestation of the ice forming in my veins. The cheerful noise from the ballroom seemed a world away. Inside, they were celebrating. Out here, I was conducting an audit of my heart, and the accounts were devastatingly unbalanced. Each memory that surfaced was like an old photograph suddenly showing its true colors, revealing the subtle shades of entitlement and expectation I had willingly ignored for years. The first major withdrawal from the Bank of Ellie happened about 15 years ago. Sarah and Tom had been married for a few years and were living in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the city. They announced they were expecting Michael. I was overjoyed. My first grandchild. During a visit, Sarah spread architectural blueprints across their small dining table. "We found the perfect house, Mom. It's in a great school district in Westchester. It has a yard, but the down payment, it's just impossible for us right now." I remember Tom's contribution to the conversation. He didn't ask, he just stated it as a fact, leaning back in his chair with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. "With my commission-based job, the banks want to see a huge chunk up front. It's a shame, we'll be stuck here for years." He sighed, as if this were a great tragedy. I saw the dream in my daughter's eyes, the dream of a perfect life for her child, the one she saw in magazines, and I wanted to give it to her. So I wrote a check for the down payment. A gift, I called it. No strings attached. They were so grateful, crying and hugging me, promising I'd always have a room waiting for me. The Ellie suite, they joked. I visited often in the early years. But as time went on, my visits became less frequent. The Ellie suite slowly filled with Tom's exercise equipment and boxes of things they didn't have space for. They never asked me to move it. They just let it become a glorified storage unit. My presence in their home, much like my money, was taken for granted. Then came the college years. Michael, a bright kid, wanted to study art history. Tom had been openly derisive. Art history? What's he going to do with that? Work at a museum for 50 grand a year? He should be going into finance, like me. The tension was thick for months. Michael was quiet and withdrawn. Sarah was caught in the middle. I stepped in. I offered to pay for his tuition at a prestigious and outrageously expensive private liberal arts college, NYU. Let the boy follow his passion, I had told them over dinner. His happiness is what matters. Tom had shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. Well, if you're footing the bill, Eleanor, I guess he can major in underwater basket weaving for all I care. Sarah had laughed, a little too loudly. The comment stung, but I told myself it was just Tom's abrasive way. I wrote the checks every semester, picturing Michael thriving, surrounded by art and history, his spirit unshackled from his father's narrow expectations. He did thrive. But now, standing here in the cold, I wondered if my grand gesture was seen not as supporting a dream, but as underwriting a foolish whim that Tom had merely tolerated because it cost him nothing. The memories kept coming, a relentless, overlapping montage of my generosity being met with casual acceptance. There was the emergency loan for Tom's BMW when his old car was making a funny noise. The loan was never repaid, never even mentioned again after the new car was gleaming in their driveway. There were the all-inclusive family vacations to the Caribbean, where I'd get a small room with a view of the service entrance while they enjoyed the oceanfront suites. There was the constant stream of funding for Jessica's expensive hobbies, ballet, horseback riding, photography, each one pursued with vigor for a few months before being discarded for the next costly pastime. I was the silent sponsor for a life they presented to the world as their own achievement. A figure emerged from the ballroom, stepping into the cool night air. It was Margaret, Robert's cousin. She was a gentle, no-nonsense woman in her late 70s, a retired librarian who lived a modest life in a small town upstate. She was one of the few people I felt a genuine connection to. She walked over and stood beside me, not speaking for a moment, simply sharing the silence. "It's a beautiful affair, Ellie," she said finally, her voice calm. "You've been very good to them." There was no judgment in her tone, just a quiet statement of fact, but it was enough to make the dam inside me crack. "Have I, Margaret?" I asked, my voice raspy with unshed tears. "Or have I just been a fool?" Margaret looked at me, her eyes clear and perceptive, searching my face. "There's a difference between being good to people and letting them be bad for you." Her simple, profound words landed with more force than any insult I'd overheard that evening. Letting them be bad for me. That's exactly what I had done. I had enabled their sense of entitlement, nurtured it with my silence and my open wallet. I had taught them that my love and my money were one and the same, an endless resource to be tapped without question or consequence. "They have a nickname for me," I confessed, the words tasting like ash. "The Bank of Ellie." Margaret didn't flinch. She just nodded slowly, a sad understanding dawning on her face. "Well," she said after a long pause, her voice firm, "the wonderful thing about banks, my dear, is that they have posted hours. They can and should close." Inside the ballroom, the band started playing a loud, upbeat song. A cheer went up from the crowd. They were about to do the toasts. Sarah and Tom would stand up, beaming. They would thank their wonderful friends and family. They would talk about love and commitment. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that my name would not be mentioned. I would be as invisible as the ink on the checks I had signed. Margaret's words echoed in my head. "Banks have posted hours. They can close." I straightened my shoulders, the flimsy fabric of my dress feeling suddenly like armor. I had spent half my life building this family's comfort, their security, their happiness. I had handed them everything on a silver platter, and they had not only taken it, they had melted it down and repurposed it into a crown of disrespect they wore for all to see. The grief I felt was profound, a mourning for a relationship I thought I had, but which had never truly existed. But beneath the grief, a new feeling was taking root, resolve. I turned to Margaret. "Thank you," I said, and the words were not just for her comforting presence, but for the clarity she had given me. "I think it's time for me to go post my hours." She gave my arm a gentle, supportive squeeze. "It's about time." With a newfound purpose, I pushed off the balustrade and walked back toward the ballroom doors. The warm, noisy air hit me as I re-entered, but I no longer felt out of place. I felt like an inspector arriving for a surprise audit. The party was still in full swing, but for me the music had stopped. It was time to tally the accounts and deliver the final statement. As I stepped back into the cacophony of the ballroom, everything seemed sharper, more defined. The clinking of glasses, the forced laughter, the garish flash of a photographer's camera. It all felt like a performance, and I was finally seeing behind the curtain. I made my way to my assigned table, front and center, a place of honor that now felt like a seat in the stocks for public display. Sarah gave me a fleeting, distracted smile as I sat down. "There you are, Mom. You missed the best man's speech. It was hilarious." I nodded, my own smile feeling tight and foreign on my face. I just needed some air. Tom leaned across the table, his face flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. "Well, don't wander off. I'm up next. You won't want to miss it." He winked, as if we were co-conspirators in the grand success of the evening. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. A moment later, the DJ announced Tom's name, and he sauntered to the microphone, basking in the applause. He looked out at the crowd, a king surveying his domain. "Wow," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Just wow. Look at this incredible day. Michael, Chloe, we are all so thrilled for you. When Sarah and I started our family, we dreamed of days like this." He paused for effect, letting the sentimentality hang in the air. He spoke of love and family, of building a future. He thanked the bride's parents for raising such a wonderful daughter. He thanked their friends for traveling to be there. He even thanked the catering staff for the unbelievable sea bass. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my heart beating a slow, steady, angry rhythm. I waited. I listened for my name, for a single word of acknowledgement, for a mention of the person who had single-handedly made the unbelievable sea bass and everything else in the room possible. It never came. He raised his glass. "So let's hear it for the happy couple, and for all the love that made this day possible." A chorus of "To Michael and Chloe" filled the room. Glasses clinked, people cheered, and in that moment, I was rendered completely invisible. It was the ultimate erasure. My contribution wasn't just taken for granted, it was completely absorbed into his and Sarah's narrative of their own success and generosity. They were the hosts. They were the providers. I was just the quiet old woman at the front table, the Bank of Ellie, its vaults open and unguarded, its owner a ghost. As Tom walked back to the table, triumphant, something inside me solidified. It was no longer just anger. It was a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just a slight. It was the culmination of 1,000 slights. It wasn't an oversight. It was a philosophy. My purpose in their lives was functional, not familial. I waited until the applause died down and the band began to play a soft interlude melody. Then I stood up. I picked up my water glass and gently tapped it with a spoon. The clear, high-pitched ring cut through the chatter. Once, twice, a few heads turned, then a few more. A ripple of curiosity spread through the room as people noticed the grandmother, who had been silent all evening, now standing and demanding their attention. Sarah looked at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Tom frowned, clearly annoyed at the interruption to his schedule of events. I walked calmly toward the microphone Tom had just abandoned. The DJ, a young man with headphones around his neck, looked at me quizzically. I gave him a small, firm nod. "I'd like to say a few words." He shrugged and stepped aside. The microphone was warm from Tom's hand. I adjusted it slightly, my movements measured and deliberate. The room was now completely silent. 200 pairs of eyes were on me. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady, amplified throughout the grand hall. It was stronger than I expected. "For those of you who don't know me, I am Elena Vance. I am Michael's grandmother." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room, meeting the gazes of Sarah's friends, of Tom's cousins, before finally landing on my family at the front table. Sarah was smiling nervously, as if bracing for a rambling, sentimental speech from an old woman. Tom looked impatient. "I want to start by saying how wonderful it is to see so many people here to celebrate Michael and Chloe." "Michael, my dear," I said, looking directly at him. He gave me a warm, genuine smile. "Watching you grow up has been one of the greatest joys of my life. And Chloe, you are a beautiful, intelligent, and kind young woman. I wish you both a lifetime of happiness, built on a foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and true partnership." The room relaxed. A few people nodded in approval. This was the kind of harmless, sweet sentiment they expected. "This is a magnificent wedding," I continued, my tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "The flowers, the music, this stunning venue, it's truly a fairy tale, and fairy tales, as we all know, are expensive." A nervous titter of laughter went through the crowd. At my table, Sarah's smile tightened. Tom's eyes narrowed. "I've overheard a few conversations tonight," I said, my voice remaining calm and conversational. and it seems I've acquired a new title, a nickname of sorts, the Bank of Ellie. I've always thought of myself as mum or grandma, but the bank, it has a certain stark clarity to it, don't you think? It clarifies my role in this family dynamic perfectly. The silence in the room was now absolute, heavy, and uncomfortable. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Sarah's face had gone pale, her hand flying to her throat. Tom was staring at me, his expression a mixture of fury and disbelief. A bank, at its core, is a business, I went on, my voice as cool as the terrace air. It provides capital for projects it deems worthy. It funds ventures, it facilitates transactions, and in return, it expects a modicum of respect, a recognition of the investment. For 20 years, I have been this family's primary investor. The down payment on a beautiful home in Westchester, that was a Bank of Ellie investment. The tuition for a prestigious NYU education, a Bank of Ellie scholarship. The luxury cars, the designer clothes for my grandchildren, the exotic vacations, all funded by my institution. I let the words hang in the air. I could see Michael's face, his expression stricken, looking from me to his parents in confusion. Chloe looked mortified. And of course this entire beautiful evening, I said, gesturing to the room, from the invitations to the very last drop of champagne you're drinking, was paid for by the Bank of Ellie, a wedding gift of over $100,000. A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to assume I was wealthy, it was another to hear the number stated so baldly. But here is the thing about banks, I said, echoing Margaret's words, making them my own. They are not charities, they operate on principles of return and reciprocity. And when an account becomes chronically overdrawn on respect, when the beneficiary sees the benefactor as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, the bank has every right to protect its assets. I looked directly at Sarah and Tom. Their faces were frozen in masks of horror. So I am here to make an announcement, a new company policy, if you will. As of this moment, the Bank of Ellie is officially closed, permanently. The shock in the room was palpable. It was a physical thing, a wave of stunned energy. This wedding, I said, my voice ringing with finality, is the last check I will ever write for this family, the last tuition I will ever pay, the last emergency I will ever fund. The portfolios you have all come to rely on are now frozen. From now on, you will have the opportunity to experience the full, unadulterated joy of funding your own lifestyles. I consider it a graduation gift. I paused, then delivered the final, quiet blow. I also met with my lawyer last week. My late husband, Robert, worked his entire life to build a legacy. He believed in hard work, integrity, and above all, respect. My will has been restructured to honor that legacy. The vast majority of my estate will now be placed in a charitable trust dedicated to educational scholarships for underprivileged students, the kind who don't have a bank for a grandmother. As for my family, my will now stipulates that any beneficiary who has demonstrated a history of treating me as a financial utility rather than a human being will be entitled to a sum of exactly $1. My legal team has a rather comprehensive file of evidence, should there be any confusion as to who qualifies. I looked at Michael, whose face was a canvas of pain. Michael, I said, my voice softening for the first time, a separate trust has been established in your name, which you will have access to on your 30th birthday, to be used as you see fit, without the influence of others. I trust you will use it wisely. Then my gaze hardened as I turned back to Sarah and Tom. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the party. You have until midnight before the caterers, the band, and the venue staff expect their final payments. I trust you'll handle it. I placed the microphone carefully back in its stand. I turned, and without looking at anyone else, I walked out of the ballroom. The silence held until the heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, and then I heard the eruption of frantic, panicked voices. But I didn't look back. I just kept walking, out of the gilded cage and into the clean, cold, liberating night. The drive home from the Oakwood estate was preternaturally quiet. I had muted my phone before my speech, and I left it muted, lying dark and silent on the passenger seat next to me. The sprawling suburbs of Westchester, with their perfectly manicured lawns and stately homes, blurred past my window. These were the streets I had helped my daughter move into, the neighborhood I had ensured my grandchildren would grow up in. Tonight, it felt like a foreign country. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about their lives, their needs, their futures. I was thinking about mine. I arrived at my own home, a comfortable but by no means ostentatious house that Robert and I had bought 40 years ago, feeling hollowed out, yet strangely light. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a profound, aching sadness. This wasn't a victory. It was a necessary amputation. I had cut away a part of my life that had become septic, and it hurt. There was no joy in it, only the grim satisfaction of survival. I slept fitfully that night, waking to the phantom sounds of my phone buzzing. The next morning, I finally unmuted it. The onslaught was immediate. 37 missed calls, over 50 text messages. They were a chaotic symphony of outrage and desperation. The first texts were from Sarah. "Mum, what did you do? You humiliated us. Tom is furious. People are staring. How could you be so cruel? You've ruined Michael's wedding day. I hope you're happy." Then came Tom's, predictably blunt and threatening. "Eleanor, you have made a grave mistake. Call me immediately. You think this is a game. You've got a war coming. Pick up your damn phone." The tone began to shift as the night wore on, and the financial reality of my announcement set in. The final payment for the venue was due by noon the day after the wedding. I knew for a fact that Tom and Sarah didn't have a spare $60,000 lying around. Their lifestyle was a carefully constructed house of cards, built on my foundation. I had just pulled it out from under them. The later messages from Sarah were pleading. "Mum, please, we can talk about this. I'm sorry, we're sorry. The venue manager is calling us non-stop. They're going to sue. Mum, I'm begging you, just this one last time. Please." I read every single message, my expression unchanging. I felt a flicker of the old instinct, the urge to swoop in, to fix it, to smooth it all over. But the memory of the nickname, the Bank of Ellie, was a potent antidote. I deleted the messages one by one, a small digital act of cleansing. I blocked Tom's number. I left Sarah's unblocked, but I didn't reply. The only message that gave me pause was from Michael. It arrived around 3 a.m. "Grandma, I don't understand everything that happened, but I'm so sorry if we hurt you. I love you. Can we please talk when you're ready? Just us." I stared at his words for a long time, a tear finally tracing a path down my cheek. He was a good boy, caught in the crossfire of his parents' greed. I would talk to him, but not yet. First, I had to finish what I had started. On Monday morning, I met with my lawyer, Mr. Davies, a shrewd, silver-haired man who had managed Robert's estate for years. He had already drawn up the new will and the trust documents as I'd instructed the week before. As I explained the events of the wedding, he listened patiently, his face impassive. "They called you the Bank of Ellie to your face?" he asked when I was done. "Not to my face," I corrected him. "Behind my back, which is worse." "Indeed," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Well, Eleanor, their behavior, while reprehensible, has made the justification for the disinheritance clause ironclad. Their frantic calls to the venue, which I'm sure are documented, will only serve as further proof of their financial dependency and subsequent panic. It's clean." We spent the next 2 hours finalizing the paperwork. I signed the documents that officially redirected the bulk of my fortune to the new Robert Vance Educational Trust. I felt a profound sense of peace as I did so. Robert's hard-earned money would now be used to build futures for those who would appreciate the opportunity, not for those who saw it as their birthright. We also formalized the trust for Michael, with strict stipulations that the funds could not be accessed, co-signed, or used as collateral by his parents for any reason. The days that followed were a storm. News travels fast in wealthy suburbs. I learned from Margaret that Tom and Sarah had been forced to take out a high-interest emergency loan, likely against their house, the house I gave them, to pay the wedding vendors and avoid a lawsuit. They had become a subject of gossip and speculation, their carefully crafted image shattered. They went from being the enviable couple with the rich mother to the cautionary tale of the family who bit the hand that fed them. Sarah tried to ambush me at my home a week later. She appeared on my doorstep, her face pale and tear-streaked, a shadow of the radiant woman from the wedding. "Mum, you can't do this to us," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "This is our life. You're destroying our life." "No, Sarah," I said, standing in the doorway, not inviting her in. "I am starting mine. The life you have was built on my money, not your hard work. You mistook my generosity for an obligation. You and Tom have an opportunity now. You can build your own life together. I truly hope you succeed." "But we need you," she cried, the raw entitlement finally breaking through the performance of sorrow. "How are we supposed to pay for the house? For the cars? For Danny's school?" "I imagine you'll find a way," I said calmly. "Most people do." I closed the door on my daughters weeping, my hand steady, my heart aching but resolute. 2 weeks later, I met Michael for coffee. He looked exhausted, caught between the love he felt for me and the loyalty he felt toward his parents. We sat in a quiet cafe, far from our usual haunts. They are a mess, Grandma, he said, stirring his coffee endlessly. Mum cries all the time. Dad is angry at everyone. They're trying to figure out how to sell the house. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this, Michael, I said sincerely. He looked up, his eyes filled with a sad wisdom. Were we really that bad? Did we really make you feel like that? You didn't, Michael, I reassured him. But the dynamic, it became toxic. I enabled it for too long. My silence made me complicit. The wedding was just the moment the lights came on, and I saw the decay that had been there all along. We talked for 2 hours. I didn't share all the ugly details, but I explained how being reduced to a financial function had eroded my sense of self, my sense of being loved for who I was. He listened, and he understood. He told me he and Chloe were planning to move to Chicago, where she had a job offer. He was going to work at a small art gallery, something he'd always wanted to do, but his father had discouraged. They wanted to start fresh, on their own terms. I saw the relief in his eyes, the freedom. As we parted, he hugged me tightly. I love you, Grandma Ellie, not the bank, just you. I love you too, Michael, I whispered back. My life is quieter now. The phone doesn't ring with demands disguised as conversation. My calendar isn't filled with family events where my presence is required, but my person is ignored. I reconnected with Margaret and other old friends. I joined a book club. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children. I'm planning a trip to Italy, something Robert and I always wanted to do. Sometimes a wave of sadness hits me when I think of Sarah, of the daughter I lost not in a single dramatic moment, but over 2 decades of quiet, creeping entitlement. I taught my family a costly lesson that day, but it came at a cost to me too. I learned that you can give someone everything you have, but you cannot make them value it. You cannot buy respect, and you cannot purchase genuine love. Those are things that must be earned, and as I begin this new, unburdened chapter of my life, I know one thing for certain. My accounts are finally balanced. The Bank of Ellie is closed, but Elena Vance, for the first time in a very long time, is finally open for business.